Eleanor Roosevelt said it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And the approach of our denomination has largely speaking been, social media is this dark and wicked, evil place. Don't go there anymore. And like, one, you're fighting a losing battle. There's no way we ever win. Like, Pandora's box has been opened. Right. You can't do that anymore. But two, like, think about this applied to literally any other communication medium. Books, magazines, CDs, DVDs. Just because the Church of Satan has a printed book of their, dogmas or teachings or whatever the cases, doesn't mean we should abandon all books.
Right.
Like, just because there's adult-themed content on the radio or on television doesn't mean that we should withdraw from that medium either.
Right.
In fact, it's the very presence of these things that cause us to lean in, saying, hey, we have the light.
Well, welcome back to Advent Next, a theological podcast curated for curious faith discussions. This week, our guest is Justin Khoe, a YouTube content creator and host of a channel formerly called That Christian Vlogger, which has since been rebranded to I'm Listening with Justin Khoe. This week, we are talking about his journey as a social media influencer, along with his current choice to shift the focus of his ministry. We also explore the importance of churches and ministries to begin using the available mediums of communication to reach newer and wider audiences. We filmed this particular segment before our current quarantine, which has only proved how relevant this social media ministry is for moving forward in a post-COVID world. Before we get started, we want to thank the Adventist Learning Community for making this program possible. If you're not already following us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, be sure to find us at the handle @AdventNext. You can follow our guest on his YouTube channel called I'm Listening with Justin Khoe, or at the Instagram handle @JKhoe. I'm your host, Kendra Arsenal, and this is Advent Next. Tell me a little bit about this journey, because I think people, when they look at you, they see somebody who is thriving in thriving in kind of social media ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of the new wave that people are looking to say, how can we really do digital evangelism well? How can we share on these platforms? So how did you get started, and what kind of led you in this direction?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that that's the perception of me. And I've actually heard this in different ways this week as I've been talking to other young people, and they've been making conclusions as they've been following my journey. And it's so bizarre that that's the case, because the reality of the situation is behind the scenes is, I've been doing this thing for full time, like 4 years, maybe a little bit more than 4 years. I haven't taken an income in about 4 years.
Wow.
And so in one respect, things are going great. And I'm so grateful. And I'm loving what I'm doing. And I think it's amazing. And I feel like I'm in the center of God's will, and I love it and the whole thing. And while that's the case, I think if people knew some of the extenuating circumstances and the sacrifices that it has taken and is taking to move forward, many times they're caught off guard. Like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that that's where things were.
Yeah, no, I think that's so what are some things that are behind the scene? Because I think a lot of times when we're on the platform, people get to see our best selves. They get to see us on our best days. We're well dressed. Hopefully, we brush our teeth, but they don't get to see the mornings that are hard to get out of bed and the challenges and the spiritual kind of things that happen in our life. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, sure. I don't mean to say that social media is my best life. I actually literally posted about this morning. It's kind of ironic that you're asking me this question. Yeah. And I'm saying, in this post, I've heard people say, don't trust what's on social media because it's a highlight reel and things aren't always that good. You don't know the struggles behind it. And I'm actually saying the opposite. No, social media does not have the ability to capture the goodness of God that I've been experiencing in my life.
Interesting.
I feel like social media is like the dumbed down version of how good life is. When I see the promise of an abundant life with Jesus, I've been taking that at face value and living that. And it doesn't mean that I'm making money, because clearly I'm not making money. It doesn't mean that I have no problems in my life, that there hasn't been tragedy, because all that's been present. Yeah. And yet, my interpretation and my understanding of my life isn't that, my life isn't really great, but I'm going to put this front for, no. My life is genuinely good. Yeah. And I want people to know that that's available. It is possible to have peace that passes understanding.
Right.
It is possible to have joy. It is possible to have this experience that is not determined by your circumstances. It's not determined by the amount of money in your bank account.
Yeah.
It's not determined by the amount of followers or how many people think you're good looking or what prestige you got or any of that kind of stuff. You can still have an abundant life all those circumstances going down the drain.
Wow.
And so like that's kind of what it is like, yeah, man, if I got to share, and we get to share some of the stories here, but even an hour isn't long enough to contain all the stories of the goodness of God in our lives. And so social media is an outlet of that, but it's just the overflow.
It sounds like you have a really good grasp on like gratitude. And I think that, I've been trying to practice this a lot in my life of like looking everything in context, in the context of where I could be. The fact I always say I have first world problems, like I've got clean drinking water, like I've got a roof over my head, I have a meal. Like these are things that really keep me grounded in the blessings that God has. But have you ever been caught up in the sense of like being kind of doing social media and being a social media pastor of saying, I don't have enough numbers, or, I think sometimes people get into I need more followers. And how have you navigated that, tension or struggle or temptation?
It's interesting because when it comes to chasing numbers, it's one of the few things that you can chase and obtain and be more unhappy with. Like the amount of joy that I had when I was having 100 subscribers and I went to 150, like the amount of joy that I got from that was like tremendous.
Right.
But then you go from 10,000 to 15,000 and you feel worse. And it's so bizarre that that's the case. And so, yes, there have absolutely been moments when I get into those seasons of counting numbers and measuring against vanity metrics, where things get worse. And it's funny because even on my phone, I have a folder for all of my apps, and every single social media app is in one folder called
vanity.
And that's exactly what it is.
Right.
And it's a reminder for me. It's like, this is a job. This is something that I get to do, and I'm privileged because of it, and I love it, and it's great. But at the end of the day, these aren't the things that bring happiness. If I shut down all my social media platforms tomorrow, I would still be just as happy.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a great outlook to continue to have. And I love that that's the title of your folder, right? It keeps that in perspective. So what kind of launched you into this journey? Like what made you get up one day and said, I'm going to be a social media pastor, and that's what I want to do?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was teaching at a small Bible college run by the Columbia Union in Philadelphia. And one of the students who came through, Michael Trojanowski III, he came through and I got to hear his story and to be a part of his journey. And the story was that he literally became a Christian because of a YouTube video.
Wow.
I was like, holy smokes, like that's wild.
Yeah.
I know that I was watching a lot of YouTube and was, even in its own way, being influenced by the content that I share. This is an idea that's not foreign to us. By beholding, you become changed. We know that that's like just a law of the universe. And yet at least for me, I never applied that to internet content as it pertains to faith. And so when I met Michael, I was like, wow, this is wild that could possibly happen. Wow. And being a part of his life, it just highlighted the power that media has. And so I went looking for Christian YouTubers, looking for Christian vloggers, looking for Adventist YouTubers. And at the time, I think I literally found 2 people on the internet who were Adventist making content. And beyond that, who were Christian making content, maybe half a dozen in total.
Gotcha.
So it really felt like there was this massive opportunity that was being
neglected.
thrown away. Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things that I try to live my life by is be the change that you want to see. Try it. And I had the deck stacked against me. Never took a video editing course, never really owned a camera, have no concept of how to shoot or compose.
So basically, having no skill is no excuse not to try, right? Because
Correct.
you had to learn everything.
Yeah, so I bought my first camera, gave it a shot, and I remember it was New Year's, about 4.5 years ago, just about, and putting down goals. All right, what would it look like to be successful when it comes to this? And I thought about church planting. I thought about what does it look like to bring a community of like-minded people coming together to worship, to be discipled, to grow in their faith. What would success look like in a church planting context?
Yeah.
Well, maybe after a year, what would it be like if we went from 0 to a couple hundred people engaged in community? Would that be success? Well, absolutely. Of course it would be.
Yeah.
So why would it be different if it was on the internet? So I set a goal of 250 people. That's the community that I wanted to curate online.
And that's pretty much a church. That's a big church.
That's the way I look at it,
yeah,
right?
Right.
God's like, nope, dream bigger. Okay, cool. Doubled my goal, wrote down 500. In 12 months, we had reached about 10,000 people.
Wow, that's
and
fantastic.
It's blown my mind. It was more than I ever thought would possibly happen.
Yeah.
And since then we've grown a little bit more here and there, and it's been this thing that I'm very glad that I get to invest in.
So how do you begin to measure success at this point? Like, what are some metrics that you say, oh, I feel successful in my media ministry? Because you obviously said numbers don't necessarily do it. So what are some of the metrics that you use?
Yeah, numbers definitely don't do it. I played that game early on trying to do it by numbers, and that leads to an entire roller coaster of emotions. Leads you to very high highs and it leads to very low lows. And so I've learned that that's not what I want to measure my success by. The only metric, and this is true in my ministry, this is true in my marriage, this is true in my life, the only metric that matters to me is faithfulness. So much to the extent that what had happened last summer was I believed God was calling me to drop the whole thing, that Christian vlogger branding, to basically kill it and start something new. And to me, it was not a hard decision to make.
Okay.
Like, it was an overnight decision. All right, God, that's what you want me to do? Clear, done, we're doing it. And so it's, on one hand, it's kind of scary to throw all the hard work away, theoretically, and start brand new. And yet it's not a hard decision because this is what God's called us to do. I mean, this is what happened early on with the YouTube channel when we first started. 10 months into the journey, God made it clear that, Justin, go all in. Don't just do this as an after school or after work type of an endeavor, like go all in. And what that meant is that I had to go home to my wife that day and tell her, God made it clear, it's time for me to quit my job and we go all in on this social media thing. Wow. AKA, I, the primary breadwinner at the time, is going to take a 100% pay cut and you're going to cover the bills.
Wow. How did she take that?
She took 2 breaths and I was like, all right, let's do it.
Wow.
30 days later, we moved across the country and we went all in.
Wow.
And to me, that's success. It's faithfulness. And at the time, I had no metrics to measure to say that, oh, I'm doing a great job. No, it was just a vision. It was just a dream. But there was clarity from God. And so we wanted to walk that through.
It's so interesting because I love that metric, faithfulness. Let God worry about the rest. You do what you're called to do and he'll cover the back end.
Or maybe he won't.
Right.
Because there's many stories, like John the Baptist, right?
Yeah.
Didn't actually end the way that we would want the story to end. He dies in a prison, alone, cold, probably by himself, right?
Right.
And yet that's okay.
Somehow it's still success.
Somehow it is. In fact, Jesus literally called him, like, of people born by women, no one has ever been greater. That's pretty successful, right? And so even if it doesn't work out the way that I want it to work out, even as I'm being quote unquote faithful and it doesn't work out, like, that's still okay. Faithfulness still is the metric to measure.
Yeah. So how did you go through this transition? What was it that you saw as needing to die, and what was the new transition phase that you needed to be in with this new direction that you're taking?
Yeah, so the old channel was a lot of like Bible study teaching stuff. Long story short, when I was in high school, I had a lot of questions about purpose and destiny and how to pray and what does it look like to have a relationship with God and all these kinds of things. Yeah. And I really didn't feel like I had too many people in my life that were like helpful in that respect. I had 1 or 2 mentors that were exceptional. Yeah. And every time I had a question, they would point me back to the scriptures. And that's one of the major reasons why I ended up growing spiritually during that season. Yeah. And, upon realizing that, the questions that I was having in my in-person ministry were no different than the ones that were happening on the internet. And so the kind of content that I was creating was exactly this. Questions from Christians answered by Christians speaking at large to a community of faith. It was kind of like, it was an online church. That's really what it was, or at least minimally an online Bible study. But, several years into the journey, what I started to realize was more and more of these channels are popping up. There's no need for what I was doing anymore. Maybe at the time when I started, there was a need because there wasn't anything. Yeah. And now they're kind of a dime a dozen. Christian advice videos are all over the place now. And then I started paying attention to what God was doing in my personal life a little bit more closely. Yeah. And what he was doing more and more, he was leading me into circles of communities that looked very different than what I grew up with. I grew up in a Christian home, went to Christian academy, the whole thing. And I was in many ways isolated from, quote unquote, the world. And what that meant was it was oftentimes very challenging and difficult to try and have real relationships. How do I relate to my atheist coworker or my gay friend or my, Muslim, whatever, fill in the blank, right? Yeah. These different categories that weren't so Adventist. I didn't know what to do. Yeah. And knowing that was a trajectory of my real life, over time, God started to make it clear, like, this is what your life is about. It's what it's always been about. It's not about sheep stealing, taking Baptists and turning them to Adventists or whatever the case is. Not that that's necessarily wrong. If you're out there doing that, all the best. Right. But it was more about, okay, there are people who don't know. people who have no clue about who they are, and they're struggling with life.
Yeah.
And what would it look like to come alongside them, to love them, and to be there for them? And so this just was happening organically, and I started to realize, oh, this is what the content should be, because the content has always been an overflow of my life. These are the questions that I'm dealing with in my life, so I'll make content about it.
Right.
And more as I started to see this habit, or maybe not habit, this reoccurrence of these types of relationships, okay, this is the type of content that I'm interested in making now.
And I love what you're doing, because it seems like a discipleship process, like a digital discipleship that's happening, where you are going on a journey and people can watch and imitate you in their own lives. And they can say, okay, this is what Justin's doing, or these are some things that he's tried. How do I apply that into my own life? And right now, I was talking to you earlier, we're taking a class in Christian ethics, and there's a book called You Are What You Love. And it really highlights the fact that we are not just information receptacles. I think Rene Descartes, when he said, cogito ergo sum, like I think, therefore I am, right? That thinking was what people attributed to human nature, that we essentially are thinking beings, but actually we are so much more than that. We are love beings, we are worship beings, we have passions, we have eros, we have these things. And so how do we begin to incorporate the holistic dimensions of a person? And a part of that is like discipleship is about showing people how to live, not necessarily giving them information, because we all have done the thing where we've learned something, but we've failed to apply it to our life. We're not following the habits that kind of lead to change. And so I think what you're doing, do you see yourself as kind of like a disciple maker, where you're saying, hey, like, I'm an example that you could look at if you're wanting to know how to, live a certain way, or begin to form certain habits, or evangelize by being in the community and having a listening ear to your audience?
Do I look at myself like that? In some ways, I mean, that is absolutely something I aspire to do. And knowing that I don't always do it perfectly, but in certain moments I can. Yeah, I absolutely am trying to say, hey, this is working, this hasn't worked for me. Maybe give it a shot. Is that like the purpose of it all, is to be that type of an individual? I mean, it's hard to say yes without feeling like an egomaniac or whatever the case is. But yeah, I don't know. I guess for me, I had not seen conversations modeled in this way. What does it look like to have an atheist friend where I don't feel like I'm compromising every other second, or I'm not feeling like I'm bashing them over the head with the Bible or something along those lines, where it's respectful, it's compassionate. We are actually getting to talk about some serious things, but we're still friends at the end of it. And what I think we're seeing so much out there in the media is just, it's this continuation of polarization. We see us versus them. And I don't know, I'm kind of tired of that. I'm not enjoying that. I'm not finding that that's making my life better. I am seeing fruit by spending time with other people. When I look at Jesus's life, Jesus spent time with the quote unquote others. Jesus always leaned into those relationships that we want to run away from. And so noticing that, maybe it's less of me trying to be the model, but it's like literally it's me documenting the journey of me trying to follow in Jesus's footsteps.
And it's such an important practice to be able to say, how do I live in plurality with other individuals who have different belief systems and practices? Because sometimes people can get stuck in a place where they think, I believe this, therefore I can only surround myself with people who believe the same as I do. Yeah,
haven't we've heard that so many times in churches, right? Like surround yourself with like-minded people. And I was hanging out with some friends earlier in Kentucky this week who are also Christian YouTubers, and they were asking me this type of line of thinking. It's like how do you spend time with them without letting them rub off on you? And like there's this fear-based element of like, oh, doesn't the Bible say, oh, bad company ruins good morals? Which I was like, is that actually in the Bible? Is that just a thing that we say? But there was this fear of like, what happens if you get their filth on you? Whatever that filth is a metaphor for. And again, when I look at the model of Jesus, it didn't seem to be a concern for him. Like he wasn't worried about that. Like that wasn't how he operated. He didn't see them as people to keep at arm's length. He actually embraced people to his own detriment, physically and sometimes even more. And so, I don't know. It's just maybe it's Maybe, hey, when you're younger, it's good to surround yourself with like-minded people. Maybe it's just a different season in my life and this is where I'm at now. But as I look at Jesus' life holistically, that's what I see.
I love the fact that I have friends from all types of walks of life, and I know that they genuinely love me. And we have a genuine friendship and a genuine relationship, even though we may not see eye to eye in all things. But there's something about just being able to be human with someone, to share a meal together, to have needs and have those needs met. We all need food. We all need companionship. There are things that we can even receive from other people who don't believe like us and be ministered unto. And I think for me, that makes my compassion grow even more, and I grow more attached. So when people, when people ask you, hey, I want to start an online church, or I think I want to start, doing some things that you were doing, what are some challenges that you try to warn them about? And what are some things that you feel like we could be doing better, or somebody could be doing better, but it's not quite there yet?
Yeah, maybe it's a bit reckless. I don't give them any of the warnings because in my experience, for every 10 people that I meet that's I want to start this thing, I've been thinking about it for years, maybe one person does something about it.
Interesting.
And so I'm not trying to squench, or what's the word, crush a dream at the very beginning. So I'm awesome, great, start tomorrow. And so I'm in more of the mindset of whatever I can do to get them going faster is what I'm kind of trying to do. There's a lot of concerns that could be done. There's a lot of things that I would try and steer them. But the overall message I try and give them is start today. Go ahead, do it. Don't wait till you got everything figured out. Done is better than perfect. Just go.
That's good. No, that's true. We don't tend to follow up on our promises that we make to ourselves. Say, I'm going to start this.
Yeah.
And so taking away some of those obstacles. When you're consulting for a church that says we want to have a more digital presence online, what is some good just advice about how to really reach an audience and maybe some of the tone to take? What are some things that you tend to tell people? Yeah,
so I challenge people to think, what type of content would you create knowing ahead of time that, let's say, 99.99%, or let's just say everyone you minister to online will never show up in your church? Because then it's a motive check. Are we doing this to get something out of it, or are we doing it because it's just the right thing to do?
Right.
So we understand, we have the framework of ministry, like Dorcas Ministries or ADRA. That's it's very missional. It's not about what we get. Now, there might be a positive return in that people see us in a different light, or fill in the blank, that we are open up to opportunities where we get to connect on a deeper level. But at the end of the day, we just simply do it because we know that it's the right thing to do. And there's no return on investment in that respect. And so I challenge people, imagine that situation. No one ever comes to your church, not one baptism. What would you create? How would you try and serve your audience? Let's imagine that the person on the other end of the screen literally never shows up to any church, but will consume your content faithfully. What would you make? How would you try to disciple that person? And how would you help them grow closer to God? I think if we start there, then we're actually getting more of a service-oriented type of show or ministry or whatever the case is, rather than one that's selfish. And I think that that's the way to go. I think that we think about, what value can I give someone, rather than what value can I get from someone.
When you look back over the last 4 years, can you tell us a little bit about what has been kind of maybe some of the darkest moments, and then and what has been some of the brightest moments in that journey? Because I feel like anybody embarking on maybe a social media journey or whatever kind of ministry that God has called them to, they're going to go through periods of light and dark. And so what did that look like for you, and what would you encourage somebody with?
So my darkest moments have almost always come from the interactions with the church. The most discouraging moments are the moments where I try and talk with the religious people.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, but also I get it, because when we see Jesus's example lived out, it seemed to kind of be the case. The discouraging moments aren't at all through the actual ministry itself. I have a lot of really, really interesting and colorful and just crazy comments from people. I have one that I got yesterday I can read.
Yeah.
But you get these wild things, and I don't know, for me, I just find them very interesting, and I'm actually kind of happy that I get them, because what it means is I'm finally breaking out of my bubble.
Yes. Yeah.
And so let me read you
please.
this comment. It It's kind of silly, and I apologize if this offends anyone listening. Adventists are Judaizer dogs barking at the church, disgusting, pompous Pharisees that pontificate that they are a remnant church here to lead all humans into truth. They have a dead Victorian woman they call their infallible interpreter, an ongoing and authoritative source of truth. Adventists are hypocritical liars that are cursed by God for teaching a legalistic works-based salvation that is far from good news. These two giggling and smiling heretics, which was me and Ben Lundquist, who I was interviewing on the show, have no part in the body of Christ and have chosen to separate themselves from Christ, grace, and the body of Christ. Other than all of that they are doing, fantastic. So like you get these comments just like, man, this guy really went out of his way.
And it's very literary and poetic.
It's beautiful. Like, I mean, the fact that this guy
written.
took time to write this comment.
I love the Victorian and all of these colorful language.
It's great. I'm not in the least bit offended by that. It does give me pause because I think, well, he's not believing this in a vacuum. He had an experience somewhere along the way, maybe rightly interpreted or wrongly interpreted, who's to say, that caused him to believe this. So I'm not offended by it in the least bit.
Wow.
I'm grateful because now I get an insight into myself, an insight into the body, and it causes me to say, okay, where is he on point? Yeah. Where is he actually speaking a truth that's maybe worded a little bit differently than I would like to hear it?
Right.
And so even when it comes to negative comments, usually people think, oh, that's the hard part. That's not the hard part. The hard part is when you believe that you're doing something that's important and you try and rally support around it, and it seems like no support is there. Last time I was here on campus at Andrews was 2 or 3 years ago, something along those lines.
And they got campus security to drag you out?
No, thankfully not. I was here to present and to share about social media ministry and things like that. But I remember sitting down for a different podcast interview, and my tone was very different. I was so cynical. I was so wounded and hurt, and I was so frustrated with the church because here we are, we're doing this thing. I feel like it's an important thing. I'm seeing the need for this type of ministry for young people, just the need for creativity in the church, all these things. And it seems like the church just doesn't care. They're sitting on their hands and just like, cool, like pat you on the back. Well done, sonny boy. Keep going. Like, we support you. But then when I ask, like, okay, what does support look like? What does it mean? Because we're living not even paycheck to paycheck. Like, I don't have a paycheck to live by, kind of a thing.
That blows me away, though. The fact that nobody has picked you up as a digital pastor and been like, hey, we value the ministry that you're doing. We're going to sponsor you because this is where, this is the forefront of evangelism.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, that was definitely my thought. Like, why wouldn't this be worth it? And I had put in some time. I'd done a decade of ministry already.
Yeah.
I've done a whole career of literature evangelism, Bible work, public evangelism. I was teaching in one of our institutions. And it's not like I was an unknown quantity, but I was so frustrated because no one seemed to care. And not that they didn't care, but it looked that way and it felt that way. And I was frustrated oftentimes. Yeah. And so those were the darkest moments. It was just having to trust and know that what God called me to was still what he had called me to, even though no one else saw it. Maybe no one outside of my immediate family, my wife, or whatever the case was. It felt like we were alone many times.
Wow. I think that's such a powerful message because so many times God has put a ministry in our hearts and he alone is the one who's validating it along the way. But we know that this is what he's called us to. And you're getting all this validation because the channel is growing and people are being interested in it. But it's the people that you want to see value or you want them to ascribe value to this, that they don't catch the vision yet. Yeah. And so I think that can be encouraging for other people who are in the similar space. Yeah. They see God working in their life. They see the vision taking off, but it's hard to bring people on board. Yeah. And all that to say, I do want to say, to be fair, things have been changing. The fact that we're in a studio like this is an evidence of it. But even beyond that, like the conversations that I'm having are very different now. Okay. With like administration. They are interested. They're skeptical, and rightfully so. And they're trying to figure out, how do we quantify this? What do we measure? What works? What's not working? But the conversation has shifted from, but is it really that good? Is it really that important? To like, okay, we see it, but we don't know how or what to do. And to the extent that even like a couple of months ago, I had an invitation to apply for a social media pastor job. I declined. Just because I know what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing. And even if it requires even more sacrifice, willing to do it. Right. As much as I am 100% interested in working alongside the institution, it's just that working as an employee
likely has some ramifications for the type of content that I personally can create.
Right.
And with the type of shows that I'm doing now, I think most Adventists would be very, very uncomfortable with it.
How do you want them, like, what is your vision, and how do you want people to catch the vision? How, like, what are some things you're like, I need you to see value in the fact that this is what's happening, and this is something that we should put resources and time behind?
Yeah. I'm not trying to make a case that we should completely abandon like an IRL church situation. Of course not. Far from the truth. And I'm not even trying to go as far as to say that every church needs to have a social media presence. But there are many bright spots around the country that really are only reaching not even a percentile of what they could be reaching if there were people who were trained and competent, social media, type people. Like I think of churches like Storyline, or even the one that's just down the street from here. Like there's many churches where there's some great stuff going out there, and yet no one knows about it simply because we're only relegated to our live stream platform and maybe like a few of our media ministries like the Hope Channel or 3ABN or whatever the case is. Like no one our generation watches that. No one gives a rip. And yet the messages is still super impactful. And so it just seems like such a low bar to set, but it is the bar that's most applicable right away. It's like, well, what if we just thought about broadcasting our message on the internet? And it's such a low bar because like the potential is so much higher than that. There's so much more that we could be doing. But it seems like this is the battle. This is where the conversation is at still.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because we come from a heritage that's a pioneer heritage.
Right.
When the printing press was out, it was revolutionary. And the fact that we began to make tracts and we began to spread them all over, that was something that not everybody was doing. And I love J.B. Himes. When I think about the Millerite movement, J.B. Himes is my guy because if it was just up to Miller, he would just be stuck in a small corner somewhere. It took somebody who had the marketing savvy, who understood how to rally the public attention, that was able to get the message across. And we have to begin to think that way.
I mean, it's even crazier. Like you think like the fact that we have a New Testament is the social media of that day. I was reading through Colossians this morning, and Paul's like, I've never been there, never met you, just heard about you guys, and I'm sending you a letter. And like that blog post was so powerful that it's literally here with us today.
Right.
So John on the island of Patmos, physically removed from his entire community of faith, he writes a letter, and it's so powerful that it's literally birthed our movement.
Yeah.
And so when I think about historically, you're absolutely right. We have embraced social media. We have embraced the then social media to the max. And it seems like we've somehow lost that momentum.
We've fallen into a little bit of traditionalism.
Yeah.
One thing I found very interesting is just in my own meditations with the Lord lately, I feel like we give Generation Z a bad rap. We talk about how they're, stuck on their devices, and you hear older generations say this.
I was going to say, do we?
I know, right?
I certainly don't. Right. I'm pretty sure you don't.
So older generations look at Generation Z and they say, you're stuck on your devices, you're stuck on your computer, like, you guys need to put these things down. And I get it. There's some legitimacy. There's some parts where it could be an addiction. But I feel like a part of that is stemmed from the fact that these were children who were probably sat in front of an iPad when they were very young.
Yeah.
And what does that train a child to do? Well, it trains a child that when I'm lonely, I go to the internet. When I need comfort, I go to the internet. Like, no longer am I looking for like my mom or my brothers or my social relations. Like, I've learned to self-medicate myself. And if we live in that age where people are learning to self-diagnose their feelings and they're turning to their device because they're looking for answers, they're looking literally for a virtual mother, why not provide that for them? Why not be that content that they can turn to? And so when I think about your ministry, I'm thinking, oh, this is somebody who is providing that kind of comfort and solace that I think this generation is looking for digitally.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all the observations that most of the older generation is making. I just disagree with the conclusion. Mm-hmm. Yes, social media, largely speaking, is this evil, wicked, addictive, terrible thing that's rotting the brains of all of us. Like, yeah, I'm there with you on that. I agree. And yet, I don't think that the conclusion, therefore, is then run away. I've been going around for years now saying this thing, and this is one of my major points as I'm trying to help people see it, is Eleanor Roosevelt said, it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And the approach of our denomination has largely speaking been, social media is this dark and wicked, evil place. Don't go there anymore. And like, one, you're fighting a losing battle. There's no way we ever win. Like, Pandora's box has been open.
Right.
You can't do that anymore. But two, like, think about this applied to literally any other communication medium: books, magazines, CDs, DVDs. Just because the Church of Satan has a printed book of their, dogmas or teachings or whatever the case is, doesn't mean we should abandon all books.
Right.
Like, just because there's adult themed content on the radio or on television doesn't mean that we should withdraw from that medium either.
Right.
In fact, it's the very presence of these things that cause us to lean in, saying, hey, we have the light.
Yeah.
And a light that's hiding it, like, what's the value of that?
Right.
And so, like, for me, it's like, yeah, all these things are true. That's why we need to be there.
Yeah.
We need to, like Wall Street Journal says, on average, I think it's millennials specifically, are spending about 18 hours a day consuming content.
Wow.
Like, wild.
Do they have jobs?
Well, I think it's largely like you're doing 2 or 3 things at once. Like right now, someone is probably listening to this podcast while scrolling through Instagram and checking their Twitter feed. So it's like 2 or 3 layers at a time.
Right.
So there's that. But then it's like, okay, you measure that amount of hours against the 1 hour that they're in church.
Yeah.
It's like literally over 100 to 1.
Yeah.
And we are surprised that people leave the church. Like, why?
Right.
Why would we be surprised? By beholding you become changed.
Exactly.
So we should actually be where people are. Jesus didn't wait for people to come to him. There were moments where that happened, but he oftentimes went to where they were.
It's so true. I love that because 1 hour a week is not going to do it.
It's not going to do anything.
No, people, we are hungry. We're hungry for socialization. We're hungry for knowledge. We're hungry for whatever it is, a relationship and community. And we're going to find that. And if we don't have enough Christian content out there, we're going to start, being like, well, maybe I'll just find other communities where I'm getting some of those more human needs met: fellowship, friendship, a sense of, that I'm not so strange in my own emotions, that can really kind of diagnose the things that I'm going through. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're in a bingeable type of economy today. It's like, well, if you find something you like, you do 12 hours of it on that first day.
Yes.
And this is no less true when it comes to people finding Jesus. Like a couple weeks ago, I had the privilege of baptizing my pagan friend. And one of the biggest challenges for him is like, I want so much more of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's like, where do I go for this?
Yeah.
And so he's on YouTube and he's watching everything that has the name of Jesus on it. And he's like learning from all kinds of different worldviews or different perspectives on the gospel or whatever the case is. Not all, which would make us as Adventists very excited about.
Yeah.
Well, he's doing that largely because he has a hunger for it.
Yeah.
And when people are hungry, they're going to find something to eat. And if we're not there providing something, well, guess what? They're still going to find something.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. I remember even in my first kind of conversion experience, or really my second coming back, I was so hungry for the Lord. And I literally felt like I could spend all day and all night just kind of consuming content. And that's such a prime time. People are looking to say, I need to be rooted. I need to be grounded. I need to recreate my entire life and my entire framework. And I think to have content out there that people can cling to, it's so important.
Absolutely.
What are some of your spiritual disciplines that you practice and apply to kind of keep you grounded in the Lord and your day-to-day relationship?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of those obvious ones that like we are really good. We learned since Pathfinders all the way up, Bible study, prayer, spending time in ministry in some way, shape, or form. Those are all good. Love them. I would affirm them wholeheartedly. I've also been learning about the value of some of the other disciplines. Like, as crazy as it sounds, like we think, oh, there's only those 3. It's like, no, there's a lot other things that have been systematized, that have been identified by the historic church, saying, no, these also have value. Things like silence or solitude, things like fasting and meditation, things like being in community. Like all of these things are really, really valuable. So where I've been spending more and more time lately is in silence, solitude, and fasting. And that's kind of what I've been trying to build into the rhythm of my life.
Tell us a little bit about the story, though, how you got into the silence and the solitude.
So I was working in the Columbia Union, and I was working with a evangelism school and a church plant. And in the church plant, there was a gentleman who was a part of this school, and I would later find out, part of the plant, and I would later find out he's gay. 30 years with the same partner, the whole thing. And he was actually the first person to reach out to my wife and I when we moved there. First person to actually ever invite us out to a meal, to introduce us, to show us around the town, the whole thing. Quickly became a friend. And then I later found out he's also gay. I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Didn't think about that. This guy literally carried around a box of great controversies in the back of his Jeep because he would hand them out to people as whenever he would like find an opportunity. Wow. And he's gay. I was like, huh, that's so different than anything I'd ever thought of as a category that could exist. I know now that's in 2020, that feels very narrow-minded, but it's just the way that I thought about it. Then I was like, wow, that's such a walking contradiction of sorts. So he actually, in reaching out in the friendship and all this kind of stuff, he's like, hey, Justin, there's this thing I want you to go to. Would you be open to it? Sure. What is it? And what it turned out to be was a weekend retreat run by Evangelicals for Social Justice. I think it was what it was called. It was a weekend experience called Oriented to Love. The location was a Catholic monastery for an entire weekend when you didn't have cell phone service. You're just in this quiet place. And part of the practice of the weekend was sitting there with a very diverse group. Christians from all different faiths, or for all different denominations, and from, different perspectives on the whole LGBTQ conversation. People like me who affirm a more traditional side, and people who were much more open-minded with what they thought was okay. And one of the things that we were doing in that weekend was, okay, we are going to table the debate. We're not here to talk about who's right and who's wrong. We're not arguing theology, but what we're going to do is we're going to sit, we're going to be present with each other, and we're going to hear each other's stories and perspectives. Sounds like a worthless opportunity, at least it did to me at the time. Like, why would that be valuable? Like, we should talk about who's right and who's wrong and what's the right answer and all these things. And what I would find out was that this practice of being in the space with people and listening was actually really powerful. I didn't know it at the time, but I was going through a severe depressive season of my life. It would become clear later. But I remember as I was being encouraged to practice silence and to spend time in solitude in this monastery. It's like, all right, well, cool, whatever. Yeah, sure, why not? I found that weekend was one of the highlights of that year. Wow. Because I learned a lot in the conversation. I didn't end up shifting theologically per se, but it did shift how I have those conversations a lot. But it ended up being like a breath of fresh air. My soul could finally breathe again when I was slowing down and being silent. My life was far too busy at that time. Gotcha. And I wasn't carving out time for this spiritual discipline.
Wow. I love that story because I think even just the power of not feeling like you're in some debate, to feel like you can just let the guard down and be in a conversation with other human beings without anybody having to come out as the victor. I think that probably characterizes what you're looking forward to do with this new channel.
Well, this is why I call the show I'm Listening.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of the pressure off. Why I don't think I could do what I'm doing now as that Christian vlogger, and hence it needed to cease to exist. And also why I turned down the pastoral job is because there's a certain pressure, especially on the internet. No, you have to tell the truth. Like capital T, you got to preach the truth, straight truth, and tell them like it is. And there's all these pressures. Like, if you don't defend at every crossroad the gospel or Jesus or whatever, then you've backslid and you're unfaithful and all these things. Dude, chill out. No, sometimes there's a lot of value in just sitting and being with someone and listening. And I really just don't feel like as a pastor or as an explicit Christian content creator on the internet that's a viable model. If I try and email some notable atheist blogger and say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Yeah. And they come and find out that I'm a pastor or I'm that Christian vlogger, they're going, no, I think I'm okay. Because I've had moments with Christians and they haven't been great. But if
they're going to try to debate me or whatever.
And that's not at all what I want to do. I really just genuinely want to connect and listen.
And if you think about even as a model of what God does, how much does he spend time listening to us? All of the things that we have to say all day long, all of our complaints and our wants and our desires and our beliefs and our angers and our fears. And he just spends a lot of time listening. And then he comes in and he'll drop a little seed of wisdom here and there. But he spends a lot of time creating space for that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's cool. What would you want to leave listeners today? Like, people who, I don't even know who this question would be targeted for. I don't know if it's people who are looking to start a social ministry, or maybe it's a word to the church and being more forward thinking in how they think about evangelism. Like, what are some things that you would want people to walk away with today?
Yeah, I mean, this is a verse that's been echoing in my mind for the last several months, and in large part because of the show. But let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. Like, how much better would our interactions with each other, with the world, whether that's in person or especially online, if we lived that way, where, you know what, it's okay, I don't need the last word. I'm okay just giving you that privilege. I'm okay not even defending what I feel like I ought to be defending. And I think the crazy thing is that nowadays in an information-heavy society, it's not right information that causes people to change their minds. Because for everything I say, there's 10 articles that contradict what I'm saying. And so it's so hard to arrive at truth just through a simple examination of the facts, because fake news, right? What speaks more loudly now isn't what you believe, but like how you believe it. The way that you carry yourself as you go about sharing a belief or just listening seems to speak more loudly. Your silence speaks louder than words.
Yeah. And people are watching.
Yeah.
And I think that Aristotle, he had a kind of ethic about, well, what is virtue? And his response is, virtue is what a virtuous person does. And so it really surrounded about, if you want to know what something virtuous looks like, look at this person doing it.
Wow.
And so I think, we've kind of slidden away from that model of imitating people, but it sounds like you're kind of affirming the fact that just being that presence is a sermon of itself.
Yeah, I used to so discount when people would quote, was it Francis of Assisi? Assisi? I don't know the right way to say that.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah, one of those. Preach always, use words when needed, kind of a thing. Like, I used to just be like, that's just the lazy way out. You don't have the courage to actually preach the gospel or to tell people like it. Because I used to be very, very, very like dogmatic in how I carried out my Adventism. And so I used to discount that idea so much. And ironically now, like, that's exactly what I find myself wanting to do more and more of, is less of me, like literally less of me, and just let God move in those moments. Let him be seen through my love. Like he said, they'll know you're my disciples when you love them.
Last question would be, when you look at the first video that you did,
oh my goodness,
to where you are now, how have you seen yourself grow?
I've gotten a little fatter, about 15, 20 pounds on. I leave my old videos up because they are reminders of where I was at the time. I think the content that I made back then was a lot of posturing. I wrapped up my identity as oftentimes being the guy that had a good answer or a wise answer or the right answer. And I found that was largely what brought me happiness in life, was knowing that I could tell you what was true. And, it manifests in the type of content I would create, questions and answers. I wanted to be the answer guy. And, this shift, like maybe the answers, answers are good. They're valuable. I'm not knocking that. But for me, that's just not what my life is about right now. I might not have all the answers to every question in the world. I just have the answer to one really good question. And his name is Jesus. And that's enough for me.
I hope this program has provided some insightful information on the importance of social media ministry today. Make sure to tune in next week as we continue exploring topics related to life and faith. We want to thank the Adventist Learning Community for making this program possible, as well as our guest, Justin Khoe. If you're not already following us on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, be sure to do so at the handle @AdventNext. You can follow our guest on his YouTube channel called I'm Listening with Justin Khoe, or at the Instagram handle @JKhoe, that's KHOE. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you next week.